entropy thing of what's true in mathematics is not governed by rules.
Try to solve it yourself. Don't look at the answers. Don't cheat. Keep on thinking about a problem until you figure your way out by yourself. Then, so you have to be patient. You have to keep on paying attention. Being patient and keeping attention on one subject is very important. And during this mindfulness, you'll find yourself encountering with your own mind.
But the point of universal computation is that you can have a single universal machine that can be programmed to do any kind of computation. And that's what makes software possible, and that's the foundation for essentially all computer technology today. But okay, the principle of computational equivalence has many implications, but one of them relates to universal computation. It says that not only is it possible to construct a universal computer, but actually it's easy. In fact, pretty much any system whose behavior isn't obviously simple will manage to do universal computation. Well, it turns out that in the computational universe, one finds that lots of systems aren't computationally reducible. Instead, they're irreducible. There's no way to work out what they will do in any reduced way. There's no choice but just to trace each step and see what happens.
That says that simulating yourself is either slower, less detailed, chancier, or all of the above than actually being yourself. Which says that to predict with certainty what you will decide to do an hour from now takes more than an hour. It takes more computational resources, because this is true whether the universe is deterministic or probabilistic, irregular, chaotic, classical, quantum mechanical, these, okay? Are you a decider? So are you making a decision? Can you model your behavior and maybe that of other things around you? And then the last one is, can I predict my own decisions? And that, of course, is a trick question because you won't be able to do this. If you answer the first two questions correctly, you cannot do the third. This is just a mathematical theorem about anything that is trying to predict itself.
Now, a general principle which may explain all of this stuff is the metric of entropy, or the measure of order or disorder. So the idea I want to submit is that on this kind of dimension of entropy, this sort of dimension of order, essentially, there's a kind of sweet spot. So these are ideas that are talked about a lot at the moment in cognitive neuroscience and systems neuroscience. There's a kind of perfect place. There's a perfect balance between kind of formlessness or complete disorder and complete stability, but stability to the extent, or order to the extent, that the system then becomes inflexible. So for consciousness to be poised in this kind of optimal place, where we can scrutinize the world in the best way, learn the nature of the world in the most optimal way, and yet retain flexibility given that the world is changeable, then there's a kind of sweet spot where the system has to be, where it's perfectly balanced between disorder and order.
All these famous mathematicians and physicists that, like, when they wanted to solve some problem, the key is they think about, okay, I'm going to solve that problem, and then next step, stop thinking about it and let it percolate. Get the mind out of the way, let the subconscious, metaphorical, perhaps it's limbic, let that system work on it, and then spontaneously it will start. And that's what they talk about with this entropic brain function. You get into these other stages of possibilities where like avalanches of networks start happening. Things start coming together in ways that your mind can't keep up with, but that we're actually designed to do those things.
Take even a very complicated feed-forward system, there is nothing it is like to be that. You can show this because recursively nothing can act back on itself, and therefore there is nothing there. We can use it, but it doesn't feel like anything. And a key consequence of that is that you can build two systems, one on the left, which is recurrent, and one on the right, which is the equivalent, purely feed-forward version of that recurrent system, which have exactly the same input-output function here up to a t = 4. So they do exactly the same job. You could treat them, they behave equivalently for any question and answers you want to get from them. And yet, if you do the analysis according to IIT, the one on the left feels like something, is something, exists. The one on the right, we can use it, but it doesn't exist at all in and of itself. So there is functional equivalence without conscious equivalence.
Recent research in cosmology has suggested that universes that produce more disorder, or entropy, over their lifetimes should tend to have more favorable conditions for the existence of intelligent beings such as ourselves. But what if that tentative cosmological connection between entropy and intelligence hints at a deeper relationship? What if intelligent behavior doesn't just correlate with the production of long-term entropy, but actually emerges directly from it?
Intelligence should be viewed as a physical process that tries to maximize future freedom of action and avoid constraints in its own future.
Well, the key message today, the tuck-in message, if you will, is that these biological systems tolerate imperfection with respect to the mechanisms generating their appearance. And that fault tolerance is a remarkable quality that surely we must try to chase.
I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability and to stop controlling and predicting.
Love 2.0 describes that energizing micro moment that you feel when you truly connect with someone else. You meet eyes and you share a common source of positivity. Now, whether that emerges between you and your soulmate or you and a complete stranger, it provides powerful nourishment for your growth and your health. This book started as my data drew me to rethink love from the ground up. I've been studying positive emotions for decades, yet my latest data were telling me that the positivity that you feel when you're connecting with others nourishes you more than any other source of positivity. But when you're really connecting with somebody else, your heart rhythms come into sync, your biochemistries come into sync, even your neural firings come into sync. It's as if in that micro moment, a single positive emotion is rolling across two brains and bodies at once.
As science has learned more about the brain, we know that love is not just a feeling, or it's not just chocolates, as you're saying, that it's actually a connection between two living brains and a connection of some considerable power over the mind and the body. And we know that across this connection that people establish, they can send information back and forth, they can regulate each other's bodily rhythms across that link, and they can even change the structure of each other's brains across that link. And that totality is what love is.
Yeah.
One of the actions of attractors is not only to prepare people to act in a certain way, but they also alter incoming sensory information so that people don't see reality. They see sensory data that's been filtered and compressed by their attractors into much simpler things. And if your attractors are not accurate, say, you won't be seeing the real world very clearly.
So this encoding of the limbic system is malleable. It can change and adapt by constant interaction with the compatible limbic system of another.
There are many different ways of changing neurochemistry. Most of them have nothing to do with medication. It's why I believe in the long run, the most effective way of balancing neurochemistry is to balance our lives. Remember, experience changes the brain.
Whenever you have an experience, you devote more of your brain to processing that. And so when you get something, be it academic or sports or music or a thought, it's just that connection is now strong. Now, an important point here is all experiences change the brain. Under stress, under fatigue, what happens is this front part of the brain here. This is the CEO of the brain. This is where David Lynch is in your brain. This is the director. All other parts of the brain send their information to the front, it gets integrated, it's sent back out. Under high stress, these connections are not used.
I wouldn't necessarily ask for more stressful experiences in my life, but this science has given me a whole new appreciation for stress. Stress gives us access to our hearts. The compassionate heart that finds joy and meaning in connecting with others. And yes, your pounding physical heart working so hard to give you strength and energy. And when you choose to view stress in this way, you're not just getting better at stress, you're actually making a pretty profound statement. You're saying that you can trust yourself to handle life's challenges. And you're remembering that you don't have to face them alone.
And your heart is pounding and you're sweating. If you're able to remember that, okay, well, this anxiety is distracting or distressing, but I also know that that anxiety, that heart pounding, is my body trying to give me energy, that in some way my body and brain are trying to rise to the challenge. Literally just remembering that 5 seconds when you're experiencing anxiety can transform that anxiety into a physiological state that actually gives you more energy, that actually gives you more confidence.
In many circumstances, the data are that optimistic people get depressed at only half the rate when setbacks occur, that optimistic people do better than expected on the sports field, in grades, and in many kinds of work, that optimistic people have yeastier immune systems, they're less likely to die of cardiovascular disease, and that descriptively optimistic people are generally liked better. It turns out if you take pessimistic people, depressive people, of which I'm an example, and you teach them principles of recognizing the catastrophic thoughts they're saying to themselves, this interview is going terribly, I've really lost my touch, and then arguing against it. No, you know, Joe's been laughing and smiling at my jokes throughout. Then it turns out you can make people permanently, lastingly more optimistic.
All of the kids were given a third and final test. Now this test was the same level of difficulty as the first one, but check out the results. The group that was praised for their intelligence actually did worse on this test than the first one. Their average score actually dropped by 20%, while the group that was praised for their effort did significantly better, raising their average score by nearly 30%. This is a 50% difference in performance that was caused by a few subtle differences in the way that they were praised. This study shows how praise can either make or break a child's development. I mean, we all do it. We all want to be positive with the children we work with, so teachers, coaches, parents are always looking for ways to support their kids and tend to praise them quite a bit. So we need to look at research like this and realize, okay, praise is a good thing and there's nothing wrong with being positive, but we need to be very careful about praising someone's intelligence or abilities and focus more on the process and the effort that they put forth.
So I envision the future of the world where the ownership of the data should be completely returned to the individuals. So all my personal data, all my behavior data, all my online data, all my genomics data, all my medical records, everything should be owned by the individual, and the privacy should be completely protected. And this is also possible through the zero knowledge proof. So there's really a world where mathematics will enter economics in a very central way in making a data marketplace possible, so that all of us will own our individual data, and then Google Cloud and all these entities then can compute in a centralized, they can compute useful statistical information without having us to reveal this privacy data. So I really think about this world where both AI and blockchain combined can do great social good in this new era of crypto-economic science based on in math we trust. Because when you really think about what's the problem with our society today, it's because there's discrimination against minority. And that is a fundamental of our society. But when you really think about AI learning, let's say if my AI algorithm is already working accurately 90% of the time, but I want some extra data so that I can go from 90% to 99%. The data I need is not yet another kind of data which looks very similar to all the previous data I have seen. I want data which is called to have high mutual entropy, namely the data that's most distinct. And that by definition is owned by the minority. But then in such a data marketplace, I will bid the highest for those data which are most in the minority. So then the economic incentive structure will be aligned. Our society will be value the minority the most. And that's exactly what we need. to do social good. So finally, there's a vision that the ugly duckling can somehow become a beautiful swan. Because the ugly duckling is not ugly, it's different. But now difference will be valued the most. Minorities in this fair data marketplace will not be discriminated against.
Let's say we had the omnipotent AI, so to speak, that was able to, where we turn over the control of the central bank to the AI, we turn over all these other things to the AI. Then the question is, we say to the AI, now do the right thing. What Gödel's theorem shows is that that will never work.
The fact that the universe is a giant computer means that there are features of the universe and things that are going to happen that we'll never be able to predict, even if we use the entire universe to predict it. Because it means that there are things that are going to happen where the only way to find out what's going to happen is just to wait and see.
The really meaningful reality is the higher level thing. It is exactly us and our consciousness and so on. And whether it's quarks or schmorks or something else is actually quite secondary. We have an existence then which is somewhat substrate independent. And I think that's also a very empowering idea. It works exactly because it's all mathematical, yes.
The most effective way of balancing neurochemistry is to balance our lives. Remember, experience changes the brain.
And to me, the value of the science is that it increases awareness, so we understand just how powerful those things are, and that the time we spend with our friends and family is not the stuff we do after we've done the important stuff, that it is the important stuff.
This is straight out of math. Complex systems which don't allow optimal self-organization move towards chaos or rigidity.
But what was really interesting was that the high-achieving groups were not those where they had one or two people with spectacularly high IQ, nor were the most successful groups the ones that had the highest aggregate IQ.
He was called the super wolf. He distinguished himself from other wolves because his behavior and his personality were extraordinary.
But math, in this day and age, is like a giant set of power tools that we're leaving on the floor, not plugged in health, while we use hand saws. If we have a lot of shared genotypes, and a lot of shared outcomes, and a lot of shared lifestyle choices, and a lot of shared environmental information, we can start to tease out the correlations between subtle variations in people, the choices they make, and the health that they create as a result of those choices. And there's open source infrastructure to do all of this.
All data that's being gathered en masse, right? Well, what's interesting about the real world data from this proliferation of sensors, right? The traffic lights are all monitoring you and able to do facial recognition, stuff like this. What's interesting about this kind of our future 1984 scenario is that all those real world sensors are having all your data aggregated and sold and traded without you ever knowing it's being obtained.
Now, because your corporeal self has rights. But if I can simulate you, if I can have enough information about you that I can build a simulation of you, I can put that simulation in a lab. And I can prod it, and I can psychoanalyze it, and I can study it all I want using whatever techniques I want. Because your simulation has no rights under the law today. So that's one of the things that we need to change. This is not just a technical issue. This is also a matter of legislation.
These are just some of the reasons to work on bettering our
mindset, data set, human connection.